So if we were to put out an ad that said, come to Momentum for this match savings program, and we're able to match your money just like this, like it's highly likely that ad would get reviewed because free money sounds too good to be true. Understandably,
sure.
It's just difficult. Another thing that we're not able to do is to target our marketing based on income levels. And our programming is specifically for low income folks. And those ad rules are designed to protect low income individuals, but it makes it more difficult for us to reach our audience through digital channels. And the ad landscape has changed so substantially.
Hi, everyone. Continuing my conversation on poverty and inflation, I'm so fascinated by organizations that work with low-income families and individuals. And one organization I came across was Momentum. It's an organization out of Alberta, and they do some fascinating work with low-income families and individuals. I wanted to highlight their work, which includes a savings app, includes a lot of courses on how to start a business, how to increase your skills, how to write a resume, a lot of skills building approaches to help low-income families and individuals. And the reason why is because when we talk about high cost of living, rising inflation, often what's missed are the impacts this has for those living at or below the poverty line. So I sat down with their Director of Community Engagement, Carolyn Davis, and what I found was that Momentum is also restricted in the types of ads that it can actually put on social media. So definitely check this out. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm so excited to share with you my conversation with Carolyn Davis. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining me here on the Open Minds podcast. I'm so excited to have you because I'm very excited to learn about you and how you got involved with Momentum, as well as Momentum itself. So how'd you get involved with it?
Yeah, thanks, Christopher, for having me. I got involved in Momentum a long time ago. I had an interest when I was finishing my undergrad. I was in the Bachelor of Commerce program at the U of C, and I knew that I was going to want to use that degree in an unconventional way, but I didn't know quite what it would be yet. So I was receiving invites to networking events at big consulting firms and kind of traditional paths. And those pathways didn't energize me. They were being lit up, but I didn't want to go that route. And so instead, I chose to apply for a microfinance fellowship and found myself in Madagascar for a year.
Wow.
And that is where I got the community economic development bug. And I started to understand how these tools for business can be used in locally rooted ways to find really specific solutions that work for communities. But I also knew that I was way too junior in my career trajectory to stay overseas and make any real difference. And it was clear to me at the time that the skill set I had was easily replaced by someone who lived locally. And so the story I told myself was that I would go home, I would deepen my practice for 10 years, and then I would reconsider international work. And now I've been at Momentum for 14 years. I have deep roots here and I'm not going anywhere.
For those that don't know, what is community economic development?
Community economic development is an approach to development or to growing assets that is really based on what already exists in a community. So rather than paying attention to what's missing, we look at what's already here and how we might be able to grow or amplify that. And we use that approach at an individual level and at a community level here at Momentum.
So tell me about Momentum, because it must have been such a great organization for you not to think about the kind of quote unquote traditional avenues for career development in the public sector, not-for-profit, in the private sector. What was it about Momentum that was so unique for you?
Well, Momentum is one of the most incredible organizations I've ever worked with. And what draws me to Momentum and keeps me here is that we work at two levels. So we have a huge breadth of programming for individuals experiencing low income and other barriers to full economic participation. And at the same time, we operate initiatives to change the systems that are holding people in poverty to begin with. And I feel that gives us a certain level of integrity in the programming and in the systems work. So we're working with individuals to build their assets to exit poverty, whether that asset is a new business or a savings account or skills to be able to enter a job market that they wouldn't have otherwise qualified for. And as those individuals build their assets and exit poverty, they tell us how things are going. And they tell us what barriers they're experiencing, and that informs our public policy work and allows us to go to shift systems saying we have the knowledge from lived experience that these are systems that are holding people back. So that's what I'm proud of about Momentum.
Carolyn, when it comes to financial issues, I wouldn't say necessarily just financial literacy, but financial issues as a whole, very personal conversations, right? Like these are big conversations, very personal. And one thing I've noticed is that it seems like there's two elements to this. Well, there's many, but two buckets that I could find, and that would be there needs to be supports, programs, and services in place, but there also needs to be behavioral change as well. And my question to you is, what have you seen through Momentum's work or in your own professional life as in community economic development that kind of bridges that gap between here are programs and services, but it's also translating into behavioral change as well for the individual and for families as well?
Yeah, it's a great question because you can learn knowledge and skills, but if there isn't a pathway to learning how to actually apply them in the life that you're living today, it's very difficult to make that stick. And so one of the behavior changes that is particularly important to us is a pattern of saving. And for me, saving, it just has such a profound impact on an individual's life because it's a way of turning hope into a verb. You're actually setting aside money for the future. And that shifts a person's brain from focusing on scarcity and current needs toward future possibilities and dreams. And so our programs are designed to include goal setting and saving for a specific lasting asset, such as education for myself, for a child, a down payment on a house, tools for work, things like hairstyling supplies, steel-toed boots. Those are barriers to entering those fields, or even to start a business.
Right.
And because if you're living on a low income, when you start a savings habit, it's hard to put away a meaningful amount of money. One of the components of our program is that we provide financial education, but we also empower an individual by matching their savings at quite high ratios so that they can experience in the short term the benefit of that habit. And then our research shows us that habit continues long after the program ends. So that's really the power of matched savings. And I think that answers your question to some extent about behavior change as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to talk about the matched savings program because I think that's super fascinating. In your role as the Director for Community Engagement, I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of critiques and resistance to savings. So tons of literature on how we kind of, in the United States at least, how they solve the quote unquote student loan issue. Some say we need to start building assets as early as possible for all low income families, through children's savings accounts, registered education savings plans. I'm sure you know this literature better than anyone. But others say, no, we need to take an income first approach. We need to, reduce the costs of basic necessities today, housing, energy costs, utilities costs, and other things like that, clothing, shelter, because the immediate needs are much more important especially for low-income families. What would you say are some of the responses to those that argue for an income-first approach? Those that say subsidies are better than asset building for low-income families.
I love the question because it opens up our thinking about our practice and our field and helps us really think critically about the strategies that we're using. And I would say it's an and. And I know that can feel like a safe answer, but our experience at Momentum is that poverty isn't only about income.
Right.
But it is always about income. So there's always a component where that would work as well. And so we're certainly interested in all the levers that can increase the likelihood that someone could have a sustainable livelihood, and income's a piece of that for sure.
100%.
So I don't think it's,
this or
I
that.
wouldn't position them in opposition necessarily. But what I do want to say, I think, is that one of the reasons that Momentum has migrated from just a pure financial literacy framework to one of financial empowerment that includes confidence and behavior change and those other aspects is because we do recognize that many issues impacting low-income earners are systems level issues. And people are experiencing that right now with inflation, right? Is that inflation is not an individual's fault, but it is their problem. And they have to figure out, living on a lower income, often a fixed benefit, how to make ends meet. And it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So if a fixed benefit isn't sufficient, or it's not indexed to inflation, that individual can't simply increase their financial knowledge to solve the problem. That's why I would agree that financial literacy is insufficient, that income is a piece of the puzzle. And we never force savings on an individual.
Yeah.
So we're not asking people to save beyond what their budgets are able to handle. We're really determined that all of our programs remain voluntary. So we resist any sort of systems intervention that says, in order to get X, you must take the Momentum program to get over here. We're really cautious about how we're positioned for that exact reason, that savings needs to be a personal decision. And that's the only way it builds new behaviors and habits. We'll all do something if we're forced to do it, but it's not going to reach lasting change.
Yeah, and that's a great comment you made, especially about subsidies and programs and services that governments operate as being part of the puzzle, but not the puzzle, not the entire piece. And I think that's very true here in Ontario, where I've had John Clark on, who's a retired Ontario Coalition Against Poverty activist. And John Clark mentions a lot about the fact that the Ontario Disability Support Program has been reduced dramatically in Ontario. And with rising costs, including housing here in Toronto, it just it just simply cannot be the only source of income for low-income families. It's just not enough to survive off. So really fascinating that you say it's part of the puzzle. It's not the entire thing. I think that's very true. In terms of savings, and I think you touched on this a little bit about having those difficult conversations, that must be really challenging for someone to open up about maybe some of the barriers, some of the hurdles they face in saving period. How do you or Momentum navigate those really tough conversations where you can feel that resistance and you can understand that not everyone's going to want to openly discuss their inability to save, or maybe their lack of financial literacy in an open way?
Well, I will say first that the folks on our staff team that engage in those conversations are just exceptionally skilled. They're so compassionate, and they're trained in trauma-informed approaches. And it's really foundational. And that's something that sets Momentum apart from, say, a financial planner at a financial institution that's there to sell product. Yeah. So our positioning in this ecosystem is so different. We're not here to sell anything. We don't work on commission. We are not selling personal information. And that stance can take a while for someone to get used to, because most of our interactions with strangers in the world are transactional in some way. Yeah. And we're taking a different approach. The beauty of that is that we can meet someone where they are at. Our facilitators are very skilled at meeting somebody where they're at to determine what might be a step that they're ready to consider today. And often that we started our financial coaching program, for example, that one is specifically designed for one-on-one private confidential conversations. A different kind of a person in a different situation would sign up for our group experiences where they're going to make some social connections and maybe make lasting friendships. But it's a personal decision which of those is most appropriate at a time.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to help someone uncover what's really going on, whether that's writing a budget for the first time and feeling a sense of specificity about what's going on rather than the emotional overwhelm that can come from starting to feel like you're really losing your ground. And then we've been quite successful in supporting people to find the small actions that will move them forward, whether it's actually checking that credit score or building a debt reduction plan, having a tough conversation with a partner about getting clearer about where money's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different directions that money conversations can take. And just about 100% of them have some kind of emotional foundation.
Of course. Isn't it finances are the number one cause for divorce, I think, in North America?
It's right up there.
It's probably up there. Yeah. If it's not number one, it's definitely number two. That's so super fascinating, Carolyn, because I always think about this in my own personal family story. You know, families, new immigrants to Toronto, had myself and my sister, 2 young kids, and their first interaction with finances here was, you know, passing the Scotia Bank on their way to their first apartment in Toronto, and then going in there, you know, not knowing about all the other financial tools that are available to help, you know, them save for their kids' university or whatever the case is. And so that interaction, that first interaction for many is with a financial advisor at a bank, and not discrediting banks, but they're there to sell services. How does Momentum market itself for, especially for maybe not just new immigrants, but low-income families whose first exposure to this is to a bank? How do you kind of reach them and make sure maybe they come to Momentum first?
Yeah, with great difficulty, because
sure,
like you said, so what we offer looks so close. It's just isn't. It's just not that close, and so it's challenging in the marketing landscape that we're in now to fully differentiate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting too nerdy on the marketing end of things, we find ourselves in a very difficult position because a lot of what we look like, a lot of how we appear gets flagged by digital marketing solutions as potentially predatory.
Wow.
Really?
Even
though that's not at all the lane that we're playing in, but the systems are just set up to protect consumers, and they cast a fairly wide net around that. So we're challenged to break through to truly new audiences and rely a lot on in-person outreach through a network of trusted nonprofit providers that are able to vouch for us and say this Momentum is doing something that not many folks are doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not language classes. There are other programs out there in the nonprofit sphere that are very easy to understand. Yeah. And what we're up to is it takes a few more steps to understand and to trust, because money is so sensitive that it may take a few exposures for someone to decide that they're willing to trust Momentum with their money or with their feelings around money, both of which are very important. Of course.
That's fascinating. I did not know about the predatory nature of being flagged. Can you talk more about that? I mean, obviously it's a very sensitive issue, but that actually might be a big barrier, especially in the digital age that we're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so if we were to put out an ad that said, come to Momentum for this match savings program, and we're able to match your money just like this, like, it's highly likely that ad would get reviewed, because free money sounds too good to be true. Understandably, it's just difficult. Another thing that we're not able to do is to target our marketing based on income levels. And our programming is specifically for low income folks. And those ad rules are designed to protect low income individuals, but it makes it more difficult for us to reach our audience through digital channels. And the ad landscape has changed so substantially. So it's a bit of a sidebar, but it's something we think about every day, which is how are we going to find the folks that we are really interested in supporting? Yeah. And our niche is a sort of adjacent. We also offer, it's adjacent to, like, I don't know, less savory actors necessarily. Lots of folks, like lots of other places, operate on a spectrum. Sure. But for us, we draw some pretty clear lines that, like, we don't sell services. that could compromise our integrity in terms of being unbiased, and we don't sell personal information.
Mhm.
And those are the two ways that many businesses find their profit margin.
That is so fascinating. And I've always been, this is totally sidebar, but I've always been fascinated by ads and who's controlling, because I feel like the internet is great, but there's fewer and fewer people making larger and larger decisions for all of us. And the fact that you can't market to low-income families, that's fascinating to me. I don't know how you would be able to on like a Facebook or a YouTube ad, because people, I don't think they put in their income levels on those platforms. But if you were to say something about low-income families, come to Momentum, check us out kind of thing, the fact that that would be flagged to me is just wild.
Yeah, it's problematic for sure.
Okay, so let's talk about the match savings program. We've kind of mentioned that. I wanted you to kind of explain it to those that may be less familiar. First of all, what a match savings program is and what Momentum's doing that's maybe a bit different.
I'd love to explain it. And I'll start with a story from my high school days. I was taking the bus home and I saw this ad from what's now Momentum. And it was saying, like, you save $1 and we'll put in $3. And then you can cash that money out for something that will move your future forward.
Oh.
And I remember my grade 12 self thinking, like, what are these folks up to? That looks so cool to me. And I tucked that away and eventually found myself working at Momentum years later. And what is so special to me about our match savings program is the combination of tangible skills and knowledge in money management combined with this powerful incentive to start saving right now. And not just to put money aside for a foggy idea of a rainy day, but a specific asset that's going to move your life forward. In so many cases, that's education. It's not always education, but in a lot of cases, that's what folks will put their money aside for.
Right.
Because education, like an RESP in a child's name, means that that person is 6 times more likely to go to post-secondary. And post-secondary education still, although I think that tide is shifting, is a very strong predictor of increased lifetime income.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the multiplier on those savings is just massive. The beauty of it is that we're doing both at the same time and we're doing it in a cohort. And so individuals are also making connections and even friendships with folks who are also starting to think about their futures.
Wow.
And we know that our peer group has a big influence on how we think and feel and act. And so being able to establish a peer group that's learning and thinking about money and setting money aside for the future is a really powerful force for change for folks experiencing barriers. We have really good evidence too that shows that the savings behavior doesn't end when the incentives end. That folks will cash out for that asset and they'll just keep saving because after 6 or 9 or 12 months, they're used to it. And the habit has been established. It's particularly strong with our youth savings program, where 95% of the youth in that program cash out for post-secondary education. And the research we did to follow up showed that the average savings of Youth Fair Gains graduates was over $400 a month. And that beats a lot of regular income folks' savings patterns.
Yes.
And the program only asked them to save $50.
Wow.
So we're seeing the power of habit establishment and just what it can possibly do to shift somebody's life trajectory.
Carolyn, you're probably one of the only people I could nerd out about this kind of research on, because I'm really interested in this. I love watching. I love reading research and how it leads to change behavior, because I think that's really important. Sometimes that's often missed by many academics when discussing social change. It's often we need to do X, but we don't see behavioral change, but we still need to do X, kind of thing. But here we need to do X, we've done it, and now behavioral change is happening. A couple questions on that. One, again, researchers show that those in the lowest income quartile, when exposed to financial literacy courses or financial education, are not as likely to engage in asset building, but they are more likely, let's say, to open a bank account, to open a savings account, but not necessarily save. You're showing that this is actually happening. But is Momentum working with the lowest income levels group within Calgary and Alberta writ large, would you say?
Well, yeah, I appreciate the question. So we work with folks experiencing low income on a bit of a spectrum. So our program for the most barriered folks with the lowest incomes would be for around earning 75% of the low income cutoff, which is really a very low income.
Yeah.
Most of the time that's a fixed benefit as well. So it's less likely that person would be earning that wage in an employment situation.
Got you.
So, but having said that, we're not well equipped to support someone who's in a deep crisis situation. So most folks that we work with have stable housing, even if that housing is in a second stage shelter, for example.
Yeah.
If a brain is really in survival mode around urgent basic needs, it's not realistic to invite them to move beyond that.
Agreed.
So I would say it just with a few qualifiers on your statement, there is some truth in it that it's difficult at that lowest level.
Yeah.
However, we do add other behavior change into the program beyond just the savings. So something as simple as attendance, being able to show up consistently and earn a certificate is something that some folks will have never experienced in their lives.
Wow.
That ability to just show up consistently to something. So we reward that. But we also reward behaviors like checking your credit score.
Yeah.
Or opening the bank account.
Right.
And we do it in a fun way that has a bit of a bingo card, and folks can sort of pick off which things are they feeling like they might be able to do this week. And every one of those small steps to behavior change leads to a bigger sense of empowerment and a sense that maybe that next bigger step wouldn't be so hard and I could take that one on too.
That's fascinating. I think that I think some of my friends could definitely benefit from that as well.
I think we could all use a bingo card, and it just might have different things on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. On that statement, I think there's also, so again, because I can nerd out with this with you, I want to ask you about delayed gratification, because that's also a big thing when it comes to this research. It's in order for someone to see an end goal, they have to believe the process. They have to trust that the process is correct for them to believe in it. Otherwise, immediate needs just take over, right? Like, why would I save $100 when I can go spend that on X, Y, and Z? Well, that $100 compounded can actually take you to a better place, let's say 10, 15 years from now. But you kind of have to see that process. So can you talk a little bit about getting over that hurdle, potentially helping many people understand the process, trust the process? I know that phrase is always thrown around, but that seems to be a big barrier as well for all of us to start saving and think more long-term about our goals.
Yeah, I like to talk about this one in a way that debunks the like low income, higher income myth or different levels of stability. Yeah. So I benefit from a matched savings program. It's called my RRSP. It's in part of my workplace benefits. And I set it up 14 years ago and don't really think about it. It happens every month. The matching occurs from my wonderful employer. And I know I'm not alone in that. Many middle income folks experience that sort of matched savings program, but they don't call it that. Yeah. And they don't decide every month to set money aside. So the willpower part is eliminated. Willpower is a finite resource in human beings. And so when we can design systems that don't require us to exercise that time and time again, we're much more likely to succeed. And so that was a key component actually of the match savings programs generally, but in particular, the Momentum Savings Challenge on the Cuber app, which is our latest innovation in this space, was really trying to provide access to something that was closer to set it and forget it. Gotcha. Because knowing that the rules of the game aren't going to change, that if I just do this, I can get to here, and providing those carrots along the way is part of the design. And it aligns exactly with what you just shared around the difference in mindset around delaying gratification and what it takes to be willing to do that.
That is exactly right. And it definitely is that stigma. I totally believe you when you say it. There is a stigma when it comes to savings and financial literacy for low-income families. I always tell my friends that we never attended any financial literacy courses from elementary to high school. And then when I turned 17, there I was sitting down with a financial advisor talking about my RRSPs. And he just showed me some random graph of the market over the past 100 years. And he said, everything will just go up. Just give me $50 a month. And I had no idea what he was talking about and what he was saying. And just, it was just the thing to do. So, uh, we always think of this in terms of low-income families, and we should actually break that stigma and say all of us need help with our finances, and we just have to be more open talking about it.
Absolutely. And because we're benefiting from the exact same programs as middle and higher income individuals with the match savings design that is the RRSP matching benefit.
That's it. That's exactly it. In fact,
we're getting it anyway.
We're getting it exactly. And if you look at the tax code system in the United States in the 60s and 70s, the really rich, the ultra rich, were hell bent on protecting their assets and building that into the tax code. So, there's something to be said about asset building at any income level is really important. And anyways, we can go on and on.
Now, if you'll invite me, if you let me, I want to talk about asset building because it's so powerful. And at Momentum, we talk about assets about like they're much more than the money. Yeah. And I think that's why they become so interesting. Right. Is we actually like if you I could sell you on the idea of building your assets. If you just wanted to do the financial part, you go buy a lottery ticket. You're lucky enough to win. And probably that windfall doesn't last. Right. Because the rest of the package to support that type of windfall isn't in place. Right. We know that the vast majority of lottery wins don't make it to a next generation. So that sort of tells us how that goes. Yeah. Which is super fascinating when you think about it. You think that I've got like $30 million, like my kids and their kids are set for life, and that rarely happens. It doesn't happen because the other assets that can help us live a really great life and a sustainable livelihood aren't necessarily in place. And that's really strong family connections and secondary connections, which are the ones that often get us our next job. Right. And the knowledge and skills to be able to navigate the world, its complexities, and the simple stuff like where's the grocery store and where's the transit station, and the confidence and mental health to be able to get out of bed in the morning and believe that we can get out there and make a difference and a sense of purpose. Yeah. Yeah. And the physical assets like a safe place to live, all of that has to be in place. And when we imagine an incident that could set us back, like imagine your car breaks down. Well, you could solve that problem with money, but you might also be able to solve it with other assets, like knowing a friend, being aware of where a resource is. There's a number of ways that we might be able to solve it through other means. Right. And so we like to speak about assets holistically so that folks know that often it's the money that's the last to arrive, but by building our other assets like knowledge and confidence and connections, when the money does come, we're in a much better position to sustain that great life. And, that is something that's not, marketed at all. It's not something folks talk about. Usually when folks talk about the lottery, they think about what am I going to buy first kind of thing. But you're right. It's those intangibles. And that actually is a really good segue because I had another question as you were speaking, and that was with regards to mental health. So total sidebar, my cousin's a manager in an ICU ward here in Toronto, and he always tells me many times people come to the ICU, like dramatic health changes happen many times as a result of mental health changes. So high levels of anxiety, depression, something like traumatic happens in a person's life. They lose someone close to them and they start eating or drinking or doing drugs, something totally not what they would have ever done in their lives. And I want to know from you, can that also translate to finances? So, if Christopher loses someone close to him, is he more likely to undertake financial risk that he wouldn't normally? Is he more likely to get into debt because of this issue? And does Momentum see that? And if they do, how do they help people through those? Because mental health is very important, I would assume, for asset building as well. For sure. I appreciate that question. And we have a program we call Money Matters, which is designed specifically to support folks as they experience mental health, and often pretty acute mental health symptoms.
Yeah.
It's a different combo. So when we were talking matched savings, it's like matching the money and financial education.
Mm-hmm.
This one is a new recipe, and the recipe is financial education, those basic money management skills like budgeting, credit, banking, assets, consumerism. They're super important building blocks.
Yeah.
But if someone's experiencing mental health crisis, they may also need tangible support with the actions required to stay afloat. And that's called financial administration. So we've developed a program that's in partnership with other agencies and Alberta Treasury branches, which is a different sort of FI. It's not a bank, not a credit union. It's in Alberta.
Always different in Alberta.
It's always different. But they've been generous enough to help us with a particular type of bank account. And it's really hard to get financial innovation to happen in big five banks. They don't have, it's just challenging for their systems.
Okay.
What this allows us to do is to provide trusteeship to an individual experiencing mental health problems for up to 2 years.
Wow.
So they will sign over the responsibility of ensuring that their bills get paid so that they don't lose their housing. This participant manages to have enough in their budget to for groceries and other essential needs. And this takes the stress of money off the table so that they can focus on their mental health and well-being.
Wow.
And it's been it's a niche program that has been very successful in terms of achieving results because it's that combination of empowering someone to learn more about money while at the same time providing a very solid safety net.
That's fascinating because, you know, although it's quite niche because people go through mental health challenges at varying stages of their life, the outcomes could be quite damaging to asset building. People can make snap decisions and judgments that could have long-lasting effects. So the fact that this is happening, financial administration, is incredible. I think that, again, it should not just be relegated, or this conversation should not be relegated to, you know, low-income families who are dealing with mental health. I mean, mental health affects all of us, regardless of income level, and something people should keep in mind when they're thinking about asset building for sure. I want to talk about the Cuber Savings app because you mentioned at the top of our podcast about finding out about momentum, you know, on the bus. And I feel like the digital age is where all young people are finding out about things. So tell me about the Cuber Savings app. How did that come about and what does it do?
Yeah, well, I was really excited and proud to be part of the design team for the product that we have now. And when we first started, we were asking ourselves, how might we scale the match savings programs that are so powerful? We know they work, but they have some barriers to them. They require someone to come to class. This was before the pandemic, so we hadn't moved all the learning online yet.
Yeah.
People needed to have a significant amount of time to set aside to coming and learning. And we knew that this wasn't going to be for everyone. And they're relatively expensive. And so we were thinking, okay, well, how might we scale these products that work in a way that leverages technology, helps us reach more people, potentially doesn't cost as much, and really meets people where they're at so that they don't have to set aside a Tuesday night a week or whatever it is to be able to come and be in the momentum environment. And we also thought it might destigmatize this idea of getting support, because as much as I love momentum, there are certain folks out there for whom they could never imagine themselves going to get support or partnership from a nonprofit.
100%.
And so we wanted to put something into the space that was easier to access. And so we were supported by Cuber, which it's our first ever corporate momentum charity mashup partnership, trying to find a way to leverage their digital skills as well as our deep knowledge of financial empowerment and what works. And the way that it works is that participants download the Cuber app, they join the challenge, they sign up for an auto deposit into a dedicated savings account as they work towards saving $500. And as they meet those milestones, Momentum matches it with incentives.
Wow.
We went with $500 as our target because the research shows that $500 is all it takes to dramatically reduce likelihood of evictions and utilities cutoffs.
Wow.
So it's a crucial cutoff. Of course, we want people to have 3 months of expenses, but you have to
Sure.
start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that $500 milestone is backed up by research as being quite powerful.
So how do people find out about this? Because I feel like this is a hidden gem in the App Store that a lot of people may not know about.
Oh, it's so tough.
Yeah.
So it's another example of like niche programming for a particular audience is very hard to communicate in a digital landscape that rewards scale.
Yes.
So, and scale is one of the strongest demonstrators of trust in the digital landscape,
Right.
like something with however many number of reviews. So we're fighting those digital infrastructure that rewards certain types of behaviors from apps that aren't in line with what we're up to. We're trying to reach the folks for whom this is just right for them. And it's been a challenge, we'll be honest. The product is so perfect for someone who just wants to take a small step to improving their financial situation.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the first step they take and then they come to coaching, or maybe they sign up for a larger scale program, or maybe they're on a wait list for something at Momentum and this is just perfect as they wait. I see it as something that's such an easy starting place, and we just want to meet people in the shallow end, and that's one way that we can do it.
Oh, that's awesome. Meet people in the shallow end. That's so true. I want to ask a couple questions on that. First is, in the time that it's been around, how have you seen, again, back to behavioral change, how have you seen behaviors before starting the app and then after the app is in someone's life?
So because this is a lower touch program, we don't have a lot of specific data about the before. But what we do know is that since the program launched in late 2019, participants have saved over $600,000 of their own money on the app. And these are all folks who have tested and verified they've experienced low income. So we know that savings behavior is happening. We also are seeing that for those who sign up, they continue to save. And so it's doing what we're looking for it to do in terms of establishing savings behavior.
Amazing. That's fascinating, because you think that that there wouldn't be change behavior after downloading an app. Sometimes apps, you just have it in the background and you don't internalize that information, but it seems like the participants are internalizing the information presented to them in the app, and it's changing their financial behavior. That actually might be quite revolutionary for like the big 5 banks and others to start thinking about how they can reach populations on financial services, obviously not selling anything, but financial behavior in particular. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, we're really pleased to see that result. It gives us some confidence that we've been, at least to some extent, able to reach folks who don't necessarily have a really close connection with someone at Momentum. Yeah. That was kind of a barrier for us to transcend, was that we knew that one of the components of Momentum's secret sauce is the relationship. People at their graduations, they speak so highly of their particular facilitator, and they've really bonded with folks in their classroom.
Right.
And seeing if we could still get to some of the outcomes around behavior change without necessarily a strong affinity to an individual facilitator has been a component of this test for us.
Interesting. Can you say that one more time? Because that's really fascinating.
Yeah, we are curious about to what extent the particular facilitator and their ability to build relationships with others in their classroom contributes to the success that an individual might have. And we know anecdotally that the answer is a lot. Like we have stories of facilitators who, like when a woman who was starting a cleaning business had hit an edge and wasn't sure if she was going to be able to continue, our facilitator spent the day in the bathroom with her, like on the other side of the stall, talking her through it. And finally that thing turned a profit. Wow. And so we're really connected to the folks who are here in the building. We have real relationships. We don't let them quit. Yeah. We're really right with them on their journey. Yeah. And so the question of, can this thing we do work on an app, was a sincere question. And so far, so good in terms of establishing savings behavior for those who are finding it.
Yeah, we don't, I don't think we do a good enough job talking about the really important work that social workers, first responders play in people's lives.
Mhm.
And we can write the best job spec, but if people don't have that trust in that relationship or that feeling that they can trust you with very sensitive financial information, personal information, their behavior will reflect that. But if they feel that they can trust you, you might have an in helping them change their behavior.
Absolutely. And being able to celebrate even the smallest step,
Yeah.
right? So, like, will $50 a month change someone's life? Maybe.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
right. And could it shift their mind and their ability to think about their future and believe that it's worth saving for? Yeah, we know that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the philosophy in financial empowerment is to really celebrate the step that someone's able to take today, even though from a judgmental angle, we might see it as looking small.
Mm-hmm.
But if for the individual, that step is big, then that step is big.
Yeah.
And we stick with them inside their reality as they take steps forward in their life.
Yeah, that's really important to have that continuous touch point with that person to make sure that they're always getting that support. Carolyn, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about inflation and rising cost of living with you, because that is kind of part of the purpose I brought you on. And I wanted to know from your experience, I know it's still really early days in how the impact of rising costs of living and inflation are having on all of us. But I can only imagine that, especially for those in the 75, 75th income quartile of the low income cutoff, that rising cost of living and inflation is really affecting them. Some say that the rising cost of living and inflation is a middle class issue. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case. I do think that this will actually impact low income families perhaps the most. What have you heard from the communities in which you engage, the people that you engage with, about inflation and rising costs? Because I'm thinking that may lead more credence to income first versus asset building, right? Like, I have immediate needs today, gas prices are high, groceries are more expensive, housing's more expensive. I don't have enough and I don't have the time to think about savings. Are you feeling that kind of sentiment right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing that from participants. And for someone who is really not able to make the math connect and sees prices rising every month, it's a very stressful situation to be in.
Yeah.
So our approach is to just validate that is a really stressful situation. It's real, and it can be even frightening to think about how to make ends meet. There are supports out there for basic needs, and one of our goals is to destigmatize access. If food is feeling stressful, go find a food resource. You don't have to do this on your own. It's not your fault that a budget isn't meeting right now when things cost a little bit more every single month and you have a fixed income. And it may not necessarily be a problem that you can hustle your way out of. And so we have these dominant narratives that aren't particularly helpful for someone who might be on a disability benefit or experiencing low income for all sorts of reasons. So we are taking first and foremost a compassionate stance with participants. Tangibly, we have supports available for folks in our programs to support them in staying in programming. So whether that's a grocery gift card for someone in a trades program, we really only spoke today about our financial empowerment programming, but we work with people to start small businesses and to find careers in tech and trades. And if they're on that journey, we want them to stay on it if they're motivated. So we do find ourselves doing more basic needs support just to ensure someone can stay in the program. We're fortunate to have donors as well that are providing those wraparound supports to be sure. We call it emergency backstop, and we do our best to keep people in programming. It's particularly acute for Indigenous families that live on reserve, where those fixed income benefits are just disastrously low. So if your benefit is $300 a month, then inflation is going to take a pretty massive chunk out of it. So all of that is real. And we work with partners through the Social Policy Collaborative that we're part of guiding to do our very best to identify policy changes that could disproportionately affect people experiencing low income and be sure that we're raising the volume on those issues.
Yeah, I think that that's always a challenge with dealing with. I hate to say dealing with, but working with governments on things because I find that when we talk about these programs, often it's not discussed in the long-term vision. It's usually talked about in a very short-term window because there's a political cycle, and I totally get that. I understand that completely, but I feel like there's certain issues that should just be apolitical, and we should just really try to think longer term about these, and how we want to kind of bridge this gap for generations. And I know that sounds pretty like the ideal, but I just recently read a research paper showing that no matter despite all of the goodwill on post-secondary for let's say Indigenous youth enrollment, there's still a vast gap between enrollment levels as well as sustained engagement in university. So that's a big deal, and I think that if we take a more longer term approach, we'll kind of address that behavioral change. It's not enough for post-secondary tuition costs to be reduced or completely taken care of. There needs to be that similar to asset building. You kind of have to believe that there's a process in place that this asset in education, as an example, will benefit you for the rest of your life. So I just feel like we need to kind of take that approach when it comes to these big issues. If only I were prime minister. Uh, um, but Carolyn, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating podcast. I've learned a lot about Momentum and the work they're doing, and that you're doing, and I've learned a lot about the great ways that Momentum is trying to reach low-income families across Calgary and Alberta, I would say. So thanks so much for coming on. I think this has been really, really fascinating.
Well, thanks for the opportunity and for your curiosity. It
Yeah,
was just a real joy to connect.
awesome. All right, I'll leave links below to everything that Carolyn mentioned, including the Cuber app and the Match Savings Program as well as a link to Momentum too. But that's all I had. Thanks again for coming on, and hopefully we'll definitely connect soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Christopher.
That was